that the current copyrights do not match this new reality as they were defined long time ago before the digital revolution, which has opened up so many new opportunities for sharing content. Almost 1 year since Mrs. Andersdotter and Mrs. Schaake and I sent a letter to President Barroso on the need to review the Information Society Directive. The Commission responded to our call with launching the Licenses for Europe initiative. That is why, together with Mrs. Schaake and Mrs. Andersdotter, we thought that it would be useful to look at not only the reasons why the Commission's initiative was not successful, but also how to move forward. In doing so, we have brought together a broad range of stakeholders, MEPs from across the political spectrum, NGOs, industry representatives, and policy experts.
It's useful for the society, it's useful for artists, but we need to better understand what kind of copyright we need and it's extremely important, what kind of limits to the copyright we want to put in place.
The phrase mentioned that we're discussing within the scope of the InfoSoc directive. And this has proven to be, in my opinion, extremely limiting, because at some point we get into a situation where we're debating how to further adjust national law with regard to regulations that are 10 years old, as we all know, instead of thinking how to frame a law, frame regulations that will work for the next 10 or 20 years. To include these other stakeholders beyond the stereotypical ones in this debate, I think, for instance, Licenses for Europe, we missed a bit the voice of educators and educational institutions. This is the same case in Poland. It's good that in the European process, for instance, scientific institutions are involved, because in the end, copyright is a system that regulates, as we all know, very intensively, also such areas as education, science, and not just culture.
If there's a political will and an elected government which says, like, as part of our coalition agreement, we want to change something here, and then a situation arises where nobody dares to because of this unclear situation and the inability of the system in Brussels to clearly express its objectives in this field, then something is broken. IPR-intensive industries in Europe are responsible for 26% of the employment in Europe and 39% of the GDP. So you get the impression without IPR, we are an economy that is about 3/4 of the current economy. And that is simply, of course, not true. The real policy discussion at the moment on the European level is one about copyright. And this must be seen as one influencing, putting the weight of all these industries and all these different mechanisms into the copyright discussion and basically saying, don't touch this because it's producing 26% of our employment. If you look into the field, the report actually states that there is 3.9% of the employment of those total employment is actually generated by what they call copyright-intensive industries. The point that we really have to make is we need to go into these issues, into these fields, look how copyright law affects specific fields.
You must take a copy. You can't mine unless you've got a copy. But if we look at licensing in relation to copyright now, very quickly, sometimes we're asked to pay, again, a second license only to text-mine, even though our institution has already paid for a subscription. You will be limited to a download rate of 1 page every 20 seconds. You just need to do the calculations. If you've got something like 1 million pages, 1 million documents, 10 pages, that's a very modest size for a text miner. We deal in tens of millions. That's going to take 6 years to download. And another important point, knowledge silos, collections, individual collections are of no use to the researcher. He is interested in information, in knowledge. He needs to go across the world's information, not to be bound by particular collections.
So it is not the musicians, it's not the creators that profit from it. It is the stakeholders who own copyright.
It's inconceivable to work out what we're going to be capable of doing with what's available. Just the publishing of gene sequences and biological data could lead to a revolution in personal medicine, allowing people to produce and generate things like customized drugs.
I would like to make a difference between data and text. Data is not copyright protectable. Text is, so I don't think the issue is so much about data, the data can be mined, and it's about the text.
In an ideal world, as a publisher, we believe everything would be published as open access with Creative Commons licenses, CC BY, CC 0, and that would allow people to do any type of analytic or computational work on the literature. But a lot of the legacy publishers resist this. They're resisting open practice overall, resisting the open access movement, partly because it does offer something of a threat to their business model. It's something that they are trying to slow down as much as anything. There's a lot of lobbying happening. And in a way, we see the voices against text and data mining as being aligned with that. What we would like to see, and I'm sure lots of people have said today, is a fair dealing exception to allow academic and commercial access to the literature.
Initiatives like OpenStreetMap, Wikipedia are unable to reproduce the results, basically differentiating between commercial and non-commercial usage, charging for commercial usage and then leaving the non-commercial part basically in the gutter means
the worst case scenario argument. We have both. As I have shown you, we have the closed list, so we follow the closed list approach in the sense of the continental European approach, and then we have a flexible balancing tool, which is the three-step test, normal exploitation, legitimate interest, and so on. But this is not used to flexibilize the system, this is used to further constrain the system. So if you wanted to achieve flexibility, you don't have it because the list is closed. And if you wanted to achieve legal certainty, you can't have that because the three-step test always applies. So it couldn't be worse. This system just cannot, I mean, regardless of what kind of system you prefer, if you want the open-ended Anglo-American approach or the legal certainty continental European approach, both fine with me, but what you can't have is this, because you frustrate both incentives, both merits, both achievements of the two systems. If you want to take something to the next term of Parliament, then take with you the idea of opening up the system. My recommendation would be implement a flexible new rule at the end of the list, saying if there is something that is not reflected in the list, we give freedom to the judge to decide on those cases on the basis of several factors. And then years later, when judges have come up with different solutions, you can still decide to add something more specific in the list, but you have a flexible system that keeps pace with the fast movement of internet businesses and internet innovation. So at least in the area of text and data mining, I have to admit, the present framework that we have at the European level is not that bad if you manage to convince member states of taking measures and not leaving it to just licensing, because there is space for exceptions and limitations.
I hope we can use the occasion of European elections to actually make a difference together.
I was particularly happy to hear the progressive report from Poland in our first panel. I've been looking for several years at the various projects of the European Union to get a more sustainable model.
Whenever I participate in events that are relating to copyright reform, I have a strange sensation, because on the one hand I feel like we're repeating the same story with a group of people who are already convinced of the urgent need for copyright reform. And at the same time, the gap between the legal reality, the European frameworks, and the actual reality that the world we live in presents is widening with every day that we wait to implement this reform. Elections offer great opportunities. And so if there's any way we can put the issue of copyright reform on the agendas in our respective member states to make it a part of the discussions and the programs of different political parties leading up to the European elections, that would be a huge help.
This directive should be revised. Many ordinary users are simply not sure as to what is legal and what is not.
Some people need to have some rights to do the work, like universities or libraries. They should be able to reuse the work, use it in classrooms, use it for distant learning, use it for research. It should be format neutral, so In some copyright acts, you can still see, okay, you can only make so many copies with a copying machine. Now it should be the way, like, it should be able to adapt to new technological inventions and innovations. I think the lobbying strength of users is still much weaker than of the right holders.
Text and data mining has nothing to do with violating copyright. If we go to limitations and exceptions that are too tight and too narrow, the copyright directive might be old again in a few years. So we really want them to consider this fair use right on top of limitations and exceptions.